if I told you a horror film once blurred the line between performance and pain, where an actress bled through her own makeup, where the stench of real decay hung in the air, and where one prop malfunction turned the set into chaos? Every scream you hear, every drop of blood you see, it wasn't all pretend. This was a production built on obsession, exhaustion, and suffering. Tonight, we dig beneath the rot to uncover the 20 disturbing facts behind Return of the Living Dead Part 3, a love story that died screaming. Fact 1. Melinda Clarke endured 9 hours of makeup to become the undead. Becoming undead was torture in real life. Melinda Clarke, who played Julie, spent up to 9 hours in the makeup chair each day, while artists glued over 100 prosthetic pieces to her face and body. The crew called it the ritual. Layers of latex, silicone, and metallic spikes were applied, then airbrushed with bruising and rot. Clarke could barely move, and every blink felt like tearing skin. The transformation wasn't filmed in sequence, meaning Clarke had to endure half-finished versions for continuity shots, wearing partial wounds for hours in a freezing studio. By the end, she described feeling like my body wasn't mine anymore. It mirrored Julie's on-screen descent, losing her humanity one prosthetic at a time. What audiences saw as striking horror was, for Clarke, a real-world endurance test of pain and claustrophobia. Fact 2. 2 camera crews fought the clock to keep the film alive. Return of the Living Dead Part 3 was shot on a breakneck schedule, just 24 days, forcing director Brian Yuzna to run 2 camera crews simultaneously. One unit handled the drama and love story, while the second filmed gore, prosthetics, and splatter inserts. This dual operation turned the set into controlled chaos. While Clarke delivered emotional lines in one room, next-door technicians blasted fake blood through pneumatic pumps. Yuzna would sprint between the two, covered in mist from fake gore sprays, shouting orders. The pressure was intense. Film stock was expensive, and there was no time for retakes. Many shots were captured in a single take, making the tension you see on screen not just acting, it was real. Actors later admitted the stress gave the movie its gritty, desperate edge. The production was literally decaying in front of the camera, and Yuzna captured every second of it. Fact 3. 5 special effects houses built the dead. To achieve the grotesque realism that defined this film, Yuzna hired 5 different special effects companies. Each had a specialty. One handled animatronic limbs, another created prosthetic wounds, another engineered splattering blood cannons. The effect was like a gruesome orchestra. Dozens of artists worked in unison, often sleeping on site to meet deadlines. They experimented with gelatin, methacel, and even edible animal fat to mimic decomposing skin. The smell alone was said to cling to the set, but the payoff was revolutionary. Every torn muscle and leaking eye socket you see is practical, not digital. It gave the film its infamous texture, wet, raw, and disturbingly tactile. When Yuzna saw the test reels, he reportedly said, "It's too real. Keep it that way." The line between art and rot had officially been crossed. Fact 4. The exoskeleton of the Riverman zombie weighed 75 pounds. The Riverman zombie, a grotesque hybrid of corpse and machine, became one of the film's most haunting creations. But the man inside that nightmare, actor Basil Wallace, suffered quietly. His metal exoskeleton, crafted from steel tubing and hydraulic joints, weighed around 75 pounds. Once sealed inside, Wallace could barely breathe. The suit required 3 assistants to lock it shut, and he could only wear it for 10 minutes at a time before overheating. Inside, he described feeling his heartbeat echo through the metal. The rivets cut into his shoulders, leaving real scars. But the result on film was unforgettable. A twitching, moaning relic of military experimentation, still fighting against its restraints. The exoskeleton was so heavy that when Wallace stumbled during one take, the crew had to catch him to prevent broken bones. The horror on screen wasn't pretend, it was the weight of the dead made real. Fact 5. Real medical tools inspired the brain-piercing devices. The film's plot centers around the U.S. military experimenting with the trioxin reanimation gas, attempting to weaponize the dead. Yuzna and writer John Penny worked with real scientists to ground the concept. The paretic infusion device, that steel rod injected into the zombie's forehead, was modeled after medical cranial tools used in the 1960s for lobotomies. What looks like sci-fi on screen came from history's darkest medical corners. The crew even used authentic surgical tables rented from a decommissioned lab. Some still bore stains that couldn't be cleaned off. Actors said walking into the lab set each morning felt like entering a morgue. The hum of fluorescent lights and smell of latex mixed with actual formaldehyde used for props. It was no wonder several extras fainted during the shoot. The result? A science lab so believable that even hardened crew members refused to eat lunch anywhere near it. Fact 6. Julie discovered that pain could silence her hunger for brains. Julie's descent is one of the most disturbing transformations in horror cinema. After reanimating, she learns that experiencing pain suppresses her hunger for brains. The filmmakers wanted it to feel disturbingly intimate, not just gore, but addiction. Melinda Clarke had to simulate this agony using glass shards, nails, and hooks, all fake but sharp enough to leave bruises. The props team built retractable spikes that could pierce through prosthetic flesh and release spurts of blood. Clarke performed many of these takes herself, trembling and panting for realism. Yuzna described the sequence as the body turning against itself. He wanted viewers to flinch, not from fear, but empathy, watching a woman claw her humanity away piece by piece. By the final reveal, where Julie's body is a living sculpture of pain, the crew reportedly fell silent. They knew they'd created something horrifying and heartbreakingly beautiful. Fact 7. The lab massacre scene was almost too real. One of the film's bloodiest moments is when a zombie escapes containment, killing scientists by smashing their heads against walls. That sequence was filmed with real pig intestines and blood mixtures of corn syrup, dye, and animal gelatin. The heat from the studio lights made it smell horrific. Extras were forced to breathe through their mouths to avoid gagging. The splatter effects were so powerful that technicians had to wear rain ponchos to shield themselves. After the first take, the director looked around and whispered, "No second take needed." To intensify realism, they used sound recordings of actual meat being tenderized for each impact. The crew's reactions during the shoot, gagging, turning away, swearing, were genuine. For all its absurdity, this film captured death with unsettling authenticity. When the scene wrapped, one assistant vomited off camera. They kept rolling. Fact 8. The restraints that held the zombies drew actual blood. When Julie and other corpses are captured for experimentation, the restraint devices seen on screen weren't CGI props. They were real mechanical clamps built from scrap metal, modified to fit around actors' heads and jaws. The props department designed them to look brutally functional, a mix of steel and rusted bolts. Unfortunately, they were functional enough to cause pain. Several actors left with bruised chins or scraped temples from the pressure. To get the right sound of tensioned metal, microphones were attached to the braces, recording every squeal and creak. The resulting soundtrack turned a cheap prop into something nightmarishly tactile. Yuzna said he wanted the scene to feel like a vivisection, where human bodies become lab animals. Watching those zombies twitch helplessly in their harnesses, it's hard not to feel sympathy. Even the dead, it seems, can still suffer. Fact 9. Chaos and injury fueled the scene where Kurt freed the dead. The climax of Return of the Living Dead. Part 3 shows Kurt releasing the captured zombies, a symbolic act of love and doom. Filming it, however, was chaos. The zombie extras were a mix of stunt performers and FX crew members suited in prosthetics. Once the gates opened, they charged forward in near-total darkness under strobe lights. Several collisions happened, with one performer breaking a finger and another dislocating a shoulder. Brian Yuzna refused to cut. He wanted the panic to look authentic. What made it onto film were real screams from extras stumbling in smoke and fake blood. The cameras caught one performer vomiting through his zombie makeup after inhaling too much fog fluid. The director called it beautiful madness. When you watch the final rampage, you're seeing exhaustion, injury, and hysteria, not special effects. It's the moment where fiction and physical suffering merged and no one left clean. Fact 10. The lovers faced real heat during the incinerator finale. The ending is one of horror's most poetic conclusions. Kurt and Julie, both doomed, step into the incinerator and burn together. But filming that scene was dangerous and deeply emotional. The flames you see are real industrial fire effects shot at Santa Clarita Studios. Actors J. Trevor Edmond and Melinda Clarke performed close to actual heat vents, wearing fire-resistant gel and thin protective suits under their clothes. Between takes, they were doused with water to prevent burns. Yuzna wanted authenticity, not digital fire compositing. The actors held each other under sweltering heat for nearly a minute per take, eyes watering, smoke filling their lungs. Clarke later said, "It felt like we were really dying together." Crew members watching the monitor reportedly cried after the final take. That moment, two lovers engulfed in flame, wasn't just performance. It was the final breath of a film built on pain, passion, and the horror of never letting go. Fact 11. The unrated VHS cut restored the gore the censors feared. The film you saw in theaters wasn't the whole story. To secure an R rating, Brian Yuzna was forced to cut nearly a full minute of gore, including close-ups of dismemberment and Julie's mutilation sequence. The MPAA called the footage sadistic. But Yuzna released a separate unrated VHS version, quietly distributed to video stores without a theatrical tag. In that edition, the camera lingers just a little longer. Torn flesh quivers, blood runs thicker, and screams echo past the edit point. Collectors now prize those tapes like forbidden relics. They show how far Yuzna pushed body horror before censorship intervened. For him, the missing frames weren't exploitation. They were the point. He said, "Pain and beauty live in the same second. I just wasn't allowed to show both." Watching the unrated cut today feels like unearthing something the censors hoped would stay buried, proof that even horror films can bleed when sliced open. Fact 12. The trioxin canisters looked so real. They caused panic on set. The infamous trioxin 2,4,5 gas, the fictional agent that reanimates the dead, wasn't entirely make-believe. Yuzna and his prop designers based the canisters on real industrial chemical drums, complete with pressurized seals and rust corrosion. The label design drew inspiration from military biohazard containers used in chemical warfare experiments. The art team even stenciled fake serial codes referencing real nerve agents. Crew members admitted it was unsettling to handle. The drums felt too authentic. For realism, the effects department used pressurized CO2 to make them hiss and vent on cue. During one take, a faulty seal popped, sending real gas vapor across the floor and causing panic among extras. No one was harmed, but the fear you see in the soldiers' faces during that scene, that wasn't acting. Even decades later, one prop still leaks pressure when handled. A grim reminder that some things inside Return of the Living Dead Part 3 were never entirely inert. Fact 13. Melinda Clarke bled for real during Julie's final transformation. Playing Julie was more than makeup and prosthetics. It was endurance. Clarke performed many stunts herself, including collapsing, thrashing, and smashing through glass. Her costume became increasingly restrictive as the film progressed. Metal spikes, chains, and hooks were glued or wired into place on her skin prosthetics. During one night shoot, a hook detached and grazed her cheek, drawing real blood. The camera kept rolling, and Yuzna used that footage. Clarke described the process as psychological torment. She couldn't sit or rest comfortably in costume, and removing the makeup often took longer than applying it. By the final week, she developed mild chemical burns from repeated adhesive use. Despite the suffering, her performance gave the film its soul. Not just a monster, but a broken human trying to feel something through agony. In her words, Julie doesn't just die, she decays with dignity. Fact 14. The sewer set almost killed the crew. The claustrophobic sewer scenes weren't filmed on location. They were shot on a hand-built set filled with recycled water and real debris. The crew pumped in fog, slime, and tinted fluid to simulate sewage, but under the hot stage lights, the mixture became toxic. The odor was unbearable, and several crew members developed respiratory irritation. During one late-night shoot, the ventilation system failed, filling the space with a chemical haze. Clarke and J. Trevor Edmond reportedly stumbled out coughing, their eyes watering so badly they couldn't continue. Production halted for half a day while they flushed the set with industrial fans. Yet Yuzna insisted on keeping the slick, grimy aesthetic. If it looks dangerous, he said, it probably is. That decision gave the scene its authenticity. Dripping water, metallic echoes, and real discomfort. The fear of suffocating you sense in those moments? It wasn't special effects. It was the crew gasping for air in their own creation. Fact 15. The sound of the dead was built from animal recordings. The movie's unsettling sound design came from real biology. The audio engineers recorded pig squeals, monkey screeches, and human retching, then slowed, layered, and distorted them to create the zombies' shrieks. The result was something almost human, yet undeniably wrong. The blend of animal cries triggered instinctive disgust in early test audiences. Yuzna loved it. He told the sound team, "If it makes your skin crawl, it's perfect." Even Julie's guttural breathing was real. Clarke recorded her gasps while wearing a tight corset to mimic panic and suffocation. Sound designers mixed that with her slowed heartbeat recorded through a chest mic, giving her undead rasp a heartbeat's rhythm. It's why Return of the Living Dead Part 3 feels so visceral. You're not just watching monsters. You're hearing the anatomy of decay. Every moan is something once alive, now looped and twisted into a dirge for the living. Fact 16. High-pressure blood pumps turned the set into a sticky slaughterhouse. The film's rivers of blood weren't digital tricks. They were powered by high-pressure air compressors feeding through tubes hidden beneath costumes and props. Each burst effect required careful timing. One wrong move, and the pump could rupture. During one take, a line misfired, sending a jet of blood 30 feet across the room and coating a camera lens. The crew froze. Yuzna stared at the splattered screen and said, "That's the shot." The blood formula was sticky, a mix of corn syrup, food coloring, and glycerin, and under the hot lights it fermented, giving off a sour smell. By week 3, everyone on set carried spare shirts. The sheer amount of fake blood used filled over 55-gallon drums. When filming wrapped, the studio drained hundreds of gallons from the floor, staining it permanently red. For weeks afterward, the soundstage reeked of sugar, rot, and iron. The scent of death lingered, sweet and sour at once. Fact 17. J. Trevor Edmond's breakdown on camera was authentic. J. Trevor Edmond, who played Kurt, wasn't just acting grief, he was living it. The script demanded he witness his girlfriend's death, resurrection, and slow descent into monstrosity. To capture raw emotion, Yuzna shot many of his close-ups without rehearsal. Edmond said he isolated himself between takes, avoiding laughter or small talk to stay in character. By week 4, the line between actor and role blurred. He described nightmares of finding her face in every shadow. The emotional exhaustion showed on screen. His trembling hands and distant eyes weren't scripted. They were genuine fatigue. Yuzna later admitted he never warned Edmond how draining the process would be, saying, "The movie ate him alive, and the camera caught it." For a film built on the horror of love turned to decay, Edmond's performance became the quiet tragedy at its core, a living man slowly dying alongside the woman he couldn't save. Fact 18. The stage itself began to rot, under layers of gore and slime. Special effects residue coated everything. The production used so many synthetic gels, latex bits, and chemical slimes that equipment began to malfunction. Cameras jammed, lighting cables corroded, and dollies slipped across the sticky floor. Crew members nicknamed the stage the Stomach because it devoured props. Makeup sponges fused to the ground. Even metal tools rusted from exposure to moisture and corn syrup. Every morning, janitors spent hours scraping coagulated blood from the walls. One day, a technician discovered a rat stuck in the goo. It had wandered in and couldn't escape. They left it as a warning. Everything that enters the world of the dead stays there. The grime you see in the finished film wasn't art direction. It was real buildup, layer upon layer of filmic rot. The longer production went on, the more the set decayed. By the final day, the entire soundstage looked like a crime scene that had been left to ferment. Fact 19. The final fire scene filled the studio with the smell of burnt latex. The film's final sequence, Kurt and Julie's fiery embrace, required real fire, real smoke, and barely controlled temperatures. The heat from the incinerator set melted paint from nearby walls. Crew members wore respirators. Each take filled the room with dense, acrid smoke, and even though the fire team supervised, the actors endured sweltering conditions. Clarke later recalled, "The air was so hot it shimmered. Every breath felt like sandpaper." When the couple finally steps into the blaze, what you see is a composite of two shots, one with live fire, another with controlled backlight. But the heat during filming was real enough that their tears weren't glycerin. They were from smoke stinging their eyes. The smell of burnt latex, fabric, and fake hair lingered for days after wrap. Crew members described it as sweet and sick. The ending wasn't just fiery imagery, it was the production itself going up in smoke. Fact 20. The film's decay became its legacy, refusing to die. Despite modest box office performance, Return of the Living Dead Part 3 became a cult resurrection. The practical effects, romantic tragedy, and grotesque design gave it second life on VHS, spreading slowly, like the infection it depicted. Over time, it became the black sheep of the franchise, too tragic for casual fans, too graphic for mainstream audiences, but deeply loved by horror purists. Melinda Clarke's image, her body pierced and blood-slick, became an icon in Fangoria magazine spreads and underground horror art. Brian Yuzna later said, "The movie was never meant to scare you. It was meant to haunt you." And it did. Its wounds aged well. Decades later, the prosthetics, the pain, and the eerie stillness hold up better than CGI ever could. It remains the rare horror film where love doesn't conquer death. It joins it. And there you have it. 20 weird, disgusting, and deeply disturbing facts about Return of the Living Dead Part 3. Behind every frame of blood was real exhaustion. Behind every scream was real pain. It wasn't just a zombie film, it was a requiem for the body, a story where decay became devotion. If you enjoyed diving into the rot with me, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me which film's dark corners you want unearthed next. Because here, we don't let the dead rest. We listen until they start whispering back.